The Story of Old Red Number 1 by Brian H. Cole. Back in the late 1912, there lived a great racing greyhound by the name of Red. He was named this due to the red number he wore in the races. Red was owned by a very angry man by the name of John Rotman. John made his living racing dogs at local racetracks. He owned many dogs and made a lot of money. However, none of his dogs made more than Red. Even though Red made a lot of money, John treated him very poorly. As a result, John Rotman had a very bad reputation. However, due to his large wealth, John was a very influential man and owned much of the town. Because Red was treated badly, he always felt that it was his fault for not being good enough. Red always tried his best in every race. Red would also practice running every time that his owner would let him out of his cage. Unfortunately, this was seldom. Every Friday night, the dog racing stadium would fill up with people from all around the country. The people mostly looked forward to watching Red race, and he was the fastest dog in the entire area, and perhaps the country. Red loved the people, and especially the children. Red, or Old Red Number 1 as the children would call him, loved to be petted by the kids on his way to and from each race, and often dreamed of playing with them. However, this would never be, as John Rotman would never let Old Red Number 1 out of his sight. When it was time for Red to race, all the other dogs would line up on the track. A gun would shoot, and the dogs would be allowed to run. It was at this time that Old Red Number 1 would say to himself, "This time I'm going to run faster than ever before so that I can please my master, John Rotman." Every race that Old Red Number 1 ran in, he would hear the crowd cheer, and he'd see kids throwing their hands in the air, hoping Red would win. Every time, Old Red Number 1 would run faster than the time before, and he'd win every race. Unfortunately, his master would treat him in the same bad way by taking him home, pushing him into his small cage with cheap dog food and dirty water. This went on for years, but Old Red Number 1 continually tried to please his master. One day, Red heard some people talking about the upcoming race on the 4th of July. They said that the dogs would win twice the normal amount of money if they won on that day. From then on, Old Red Number 1 was determined to run faster than ever on that day. He felt that this time his master would surely love him, as Red deeply wanted. The night before the 4th of July race, Red was put into a cage with a female dog by the name of Lightning. This was done occasionally so that the dogs would have puppies for future races. Lightning was also one of the fastest dogs. That night, the two dogs cuddled together and were very happy. Finally, it was the 4th of July, and Old Red Number 1 was more than ready. As Red walked to the track, the kids seemed more than excited than usual, and this made Red even more ready. The dogs were all lined up and ready to go, and then, bang! The race was underway. Red flew out of the starting box and quickly was in the lead. In fact, he was so fast this time that the crowd went crazy with excitement. Red was almost at the finish line when his right foot slipped on some mud from a previous rainstorm. His body slammed to the ground and his leg was broken. However, Red was so determined to win that he jumped on 3 good legs and limped past the finish line. Old Red Number 1 had run the race. The children could not believe their eyes. They all raced down to help Old Red. The attention that the children gave him made all of the pain from his broken leg disappear. Old Red loved the attention that he was getting from the kids. But suddenly, Red felt someone grab his collar and yank him away. It was John Rotman, his master. John yelled at the kids to get away from his dog. But 2 young kids would not leave Old Red. It was a young boy and girl who never knew each other up until this point, but both were determined to help Red. They looked at John Rotman and said that they'd take care of him, fix his leg, and bring him to health again. John Rotman was astonished at the bravery of these two young kids. He also realized that Red would never run again, and that Red would only be a burden to him now since Red's leg is broken so badly. "You want him? You take him," John said in a mean way. "He's made me money, and that's all he's good for, and I have other dogs that'll win me money anyway." Both kids looked at each other and whispered to one another. John Rotman didn't know what was going on, so he just watched. Then after about a minute, the young kid said, "We'll challenge you to a race in 6 months. At that time, we'll have Red healthy for a race with any dog of your choice. If you win, we'll work for free for an entire year, taking care of your dogs and doing chores. But if you lose, you give us your dogs and never race dogs again." John was shocked by this challenge. He looked at broken down Red and then looked at the kids and just started to laugh. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I'll do that." And then he left. Most of the town watched this event and were witness to the challenge. Then the young boy and girl started to pick up poor Red, and a group of other kids pitched in to help. They carried Red to the young boy's house, where for the next 5 weeks the kids kept constant watch over Red. They washed him, put a splint on his leg, and gave him plenty of clean water and good food. Even the adults started to help, and pretty soon the entire town was helping. When old Red was able to get on his broken leg, he started slow, but after a few weeks he was walking and even running a little. Old Red number 1 was in heaven. He didn't know what kindness was, except for when the kids petted him during those short times after his previous races. Now old Red number 1 had a town full of masters, and they were all good to him. John Rotman saw what was going on, and he didn't care. He knew old Red would never race again. At least he would never be fast. The broken leg that Red had was a bad one, and John Rotman had never seen a dog improve well enough to race after an injury like that one. Months went by, and the kids started to run old Red. Heck, old Red loved it. Running was what he loved, and it wasn't work to him. He ran circles around them and then ran some more. He played with them and tumbled around with all the kids. They would roll around in the dirt, play fetch, run and jump. Old Red was feeling great, and he was doing things he never did before. He loved to run, but he also loved rolling around with the kids. But old Red number 1 was also determined to win this race. He understood what the kids had bet with John Rotman, and he wanted to get his other dog friends out of that slave camp. He also wanted to see Lightning again. He liked her. For this reason, Red took this challenge with more determination than ever before. This time he wanted to run fast for those that loved him, and not for an angry man that just loved his money. This time old Red number 1 knew the difference between love and hate, and between being treated good and treated bad. He never wanted to see any of his dog friends with John Rotman again. As the race grew near, it was learned that John Rotman had spent a lot of money on 5 dogs. Each of these dogs came from other countries, and each of them was the fastest in that country. John Rotman was taking no chances at losing. The day of the race arrived, and John Rotman had one more thing to do. Just before the race, he went on to the track at the very location that old Red broke his leg, and he watered it down good. He made it muddy and then covered it with some dry dirt so no one could tell. It was time to line up, so old Red number 1 lined up with the other 5 dogs, and they were ready to go. Bang! The race was on. Old Red jumped out onto the track, but to his surprise, 5 other dogs were next to him. All were the same speed. Old Red kicked it into high gear and pulled ahead just slightly, but the others were very close. It was a close race. Then they came up to the final turn. You know the one where old Red broke his leg 6 months earlier. They took the turn, and old Red started to slip. He wasn't alone, as 4 other dogs slipped as well. But this time, Old Red knew what to do. He rolled, just like he did when he was playing with the kids. The other dogs fell down, but they were not hurt. However, they would never catch up. But Old Red number 1 came out of his roll in forward motion and right back on the track. He had lost some ground, but the one dog left in the race was only slightly ahead of him. No way was Old Red going to lose. He pushed himself to his extreme limit and passed the other dog just in time. Old Red number 1 won the race. The townspeople cheered for joy. It was the happiest moment for everyone, except John Rotman. After the race, John Rotman gave up his dogs and never had any for the rest of his life. Even he was able to see the wonderful things the kids did, and the rumor has it that he even pets Old Red once in a while. Red went on with life, and this time he was with other dog friends, his kid friends, and of course Lightning. The end. Dedicated to 3 wonderful grandchildren, Jada, Finn, and Asher.